If you were to look at my channel and the games I've covered up to this point, do you think you'd be able to guess the genre I have some of my most childhood nostalgic memories with? I bet you can't, and that's because it's a genre I have yet to talk about on this channel. And I'm still not in any great detail, it's just somewhat related to this video. But as a kid, I adored the RTS genre. It's a genre I don't find myself playing a ton of as I've gotten older, just simply because they can be such a time and mental commitment. I mean, it's not a kick back and relax sort of experience, but as a kid, even though I was terrible, I loved these types of games. Whether it was StarCraft, Warcraft 3, Command and Conquer, Company of Heroes, Age of Empires, and Total War, whatever it was, whatever setting, it didn't matter. I wanted to play it, and that love for a genre is what ended up introducing me to the Warhammer 40K universe with Dawn of War. Now, Dawn of War and Dawn of War 2 were incredible games, but what always stuck with me was this universe and how visually and aesthetically, well, badass 40K is. Being just 7 years old at the time, I didn't really appreciate the lore, but I simply loved this setting and these factions, and from Dawn of War, I was checking out any and all the 40K games I could, and still do to this day. It still is a primarily strategy-focused IP, whether it be RTS, turn-based strategy or tactics, or 4X, but every now and again they do venture out in an attempt to bring more fans in, and that was the case with 2011's Space Marine. Seeing 40K step into the third-person shooter genre actually got me really excited, as to me it looked and sounded like Gears of War, just with Space Marines battling orcs instead, and that was enough to get me to pick the game up day one. And I loved it. Yes, it had its jank and it wasn't perfect, but it let me be a Space Marine and battle these foes I'd come to know from a distance, up close and personal. And that's really all I was looking for at that time. But it's been almost 12 years since the game released and I last played it. Space Marine 2 is finally releasing later this year, and I'm curious to see how it holds up today. So, let's find out if Warhammer 40K Space Marine was as good as I remember. If you want some more videos on Warhammer and Warhammer 40K in the future, be sure to leave the video a like, comment below, and what the hell, subscribe so you don't miss the next video. First things first, I've got to talk about the story because it's not great. I didn't remember it being anything special, but it has so much potential that is just wasted here. As I said a minute ago, Space Marine was a real chance to get new players invested into this world, and they just don't explain anything to help said players figure out what is even going on. And the story itself leaves a lot to be desired for existing fans. Really, the story can be boiled down to big blue guys fighting green and purple guys. At least that's all I can see 40k newbies getting out of this story, and there is so much more potential here than that. For instance, you play as Captain Titus, and for most of the game you have two other Space Marines by your side in veteran Sergeant Sidonis and the newbie Leandros. A squad of Space Marines who do talk to one another, but 95% of the time they're simply talking about the objective at hand. Where's the feeling of camaraderie? Where's the deeper conversations? Hell, why not replace the objective talk with these guys shooting the shit about these factions and this universe more? You've got the newbie character right there who can fill that sort of question-filled role. But they don't do that, and instead I felt myself zoning out quite a lot during the cutscenes and walking and talking moments because it's just not all that interesting, and you don't feel any sort of connection to these characters. You don't know more than anything surface level about anyone you meet, and again, that could have been solved with more engaging conversations in between combat. The only real world building you get is from the guardsmen and their reverence for the Space Marines, or the audio logs which help flesh out this world before the orcs attacked, what was going on behind the scenes with the Inquisitor, that sort of thing, that I did really enjoy finding and listening to. But that can't be where all the story significance comes from. Probably the part of the story that contains the most potential is the conflict between Titus and Leandros. As Leandros is very by the books, the teachings say this so there can be no other explanation sort of person, and with Titus being able to resist and survive the exposure to chaos, well, we see how that ends. Leandros hands Titus into the Inquisition, and that's the game. But even this plot device doesn't get enough attention and feels like sequel bait that wasn't earned, and as of right now is just like, well, how has he survived? Zero explanation in this game, really. I know this was intended to be a trilogy, but come on now. Again, it just feels like this story had so much potential and it just didn't achieve it, which is disappointing. The story isn't non-existent. I mean, just look at the wiki synopsis. There is something here, it's just not executed properly. But at the same time, I didn't remember the story being anything to write home about anyway, and as long as it gets me slaying some orcs, then I'll take it. I'd like some more, but I'll take the excuse. So let's move on to the gameplay, which thankfully is still a good time. It definitely has its share of problems, but as a whole, I had an absolute blast with the gameplay, and I think that comes down to how much the game makes you feel like a space marine. You tower over your allies, your movement has this great weight behind it, and your attacks, whether they be firearms or your melee attacks, feel like they pack an extraordinary punch. It really is like a power fantasy. Even on the hardest difficulty, the game isn't that challenging. It can be towards the end for reasons I'll touch on, because I do think the first half plays better than the second, but for the most part you just feel like a killing machine, and I love that for this game. The gameplay is just straight combat. We don't have time to worry about platforming or puzzles, it's just fight, fight, fight. And where that formula can lead to a feeling of repetition, here in Space Marine they do a great job at mixing up your weaponry, enemies and arenas often enough to ward that feeling off. You can hold 4 firearms at a time and 1 melee weapon, but there is a good number of options to swap between, though there could have been even more. I mean, the list of Space Marine weaponry is insane. And what you decide to pick up and swap out would depend on the types of encounters and enemies you're expecting to run into. All weapons are viable and are a lot of fun to use, just seeing the destruction they bring upon your enemies, and the drip feed of new weapons is paced out really well, and same with new enemies. Starting out facing simple Gretchens and Slugger Boys, and gradually introducing more and more enemies from tougher melee units, ranged units, tanks, that sort of thing. This progression is done really well here, as it allows the player to come to terms with all the pros and cons to these encounters. Like for instance, melee is great, it is always good in a pinch, and you need to be performing executions to survive the longer encounters. But the orcs can easily swarm you and hound you from range, and those executions don't make you invincible, so even if you're desperate for the health, you need to pick your moments. You need to be incorporating both your melee and ranged attacks and pick what enemies need to go first, and in the heat of a horde, that's often easier said than done, which is why the combat is such a great time. The combat feels like a nice blend between third-person shooter and hack and slash, and it's just a great time annihilating the orcs. It's not the best mechanically in terms of either the hack and slash melee with no combinations, and the third-person shooting does feel basic, but it gets the job done. Also, the jump pack segments make you feel like a damn wrecking ball, and it's amazing. Sure, you're better off just spamming the slam attack rather than mixing it up with actual gunplay, but after all these enemies giving you grief, being that wrecking ball is just good fun. As a whole, the combat does a great job at encouraging you to play aggressive, but also be thoughtful about what your next move will be, as to not leave yourself in between a rock and a hard place. Unfortunately, the gameplay does take a wrong turn after chaos is brought into the picture about halfway through the game. Now, that's not to say it's bad or completely falls off, but it exposes a lot of this game's mechanical faults as well as not feeling as nicely paced out. One example is the Chaos unit's aim is impeccable. The orcs aren't a bad shot, but you feel like you can traverse the arena without fear of every shot landing. That's not the case with Chaos, and because of that dead shot like aim, it poses the question as to why there is no cover system here. I mean, I need to hide behind the environment, anyway and pick my shots, why not have the option to at least go into cover behind larger objects? I don't need it to be exactly like Gears, but it needed to be better than what we got here. Once Chaos comes into the picture as well, melee viability feels like it falls off a cliff, because once again, their aim is so damn accurate, and this game's strength is melding the melee and shooting together. It's not the strongest at either mechanic, but together they work so well, and that all goes away towards the end of the game. The introduction of the Chaos units also feels far more rushed than the Orcs, which is a real shame because they're a tough foe to encounter. But you get introduced to so many enemies so quickly that they don't feel unique. I would have liked them to be paced out just as well as the Orc units and give them their own special intro cutscenes because they look freaking badass. On the more nitpicky side, the mission where all you're battling is turrets is a bit lame. I understand the Orcs haven't reached this area yet, but I need more than just turrets to battle. The 3 boss battles also aren't the best. The gameplay just doesn't meld with that sort of gameplay experience. They aren't bad. I mean, the Nemiroff fight is just a QTE, which is a big letdown, and the first boss is just a turret section. Grimskull isn't too bad. It's an enjoyable fight, but yeah, again, not the game's strongest moments like a boss battle should be. I know I've criticized Space Marine quite a bit in this video, but I don't think these elements hamper the experience as a whole. Yes, they could have been better as I've gone over, but as a whole, the gameplay is still a lot of fun because the foundation is so strong. The variety, the feeling of power, the enemy design, the world itself is all great, and despite its faults, it doesn't overstay its welcome. It's a nice, short campaign that lets you fully sink into your Space Marine role, and that makes for a good time. So, was Warhammer 40K Space Marine as good as I remember? Yeah, it is. As I said in the intro, I didn't think Space Marine was ever perfect, and while the story was a real letdown this time around, the gameplay is still just so much fun, and possibly this game's biggest strength is immersing you in this world and the 40k universe, which it does incredibly well. This feels like I've stepped into the tabletop. The Space Marines, the Orcs, the Forces of Chaos, the war-torn world to the untouched visual marvels, the sound and impact of your movement, weapons and enemies. It's great stuff and just elevates the gameplay as a whole. I had a blast revisiting this game even with the game's shortcomings because it is such a joy to play. This is 6 hours of orc slaying, chaos destroying fun, and that's what I'm looking for in this type of experience. Yes, they could improve, and I hope they do improve for the sequel, but for Relic's second attempt at the genre, this was a great effort and a great time to play even today. Thank you all so much for watching the video. Make sure if you did enjoy to leave the video a like because it helps let me know that you enjoyed yourself. Comment below your thoughts on Space Marine and tell me if you want to see some more Warhammer 40k on the channel. Shout out to the channel members Infamous Sir Hellfire, featuring Gagiano, Christian Volgag, Cloud Connection, Kranatoko, Crumb Sparky, Conker and Driftum for that extra level of support. I truly do appreciate it. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe. Go give my socials a follow if you fancy @MayorHairBear, and I'll catch you all in the next video.